Right, guys, just want to talk about how we perceive or engage with others in the sense of being critical on the way others act, others do things. The media has driven this in a very, very negative way. It's much harder to praise somebody than it is to run them down. You find people constantly run people down these days. And like I said, a lot of that's been driven by media that encourages it. I would also say it's cheap media because let's face it, if you've got somebody from a band that's falling over in the gutter drunk, you took a few photos and put it on the front page of a newspaper, was there much effort to put that news story together? No. If you had to go into an in-depth story on why somebody's done something or achieved something or invented something, it involves a bit more work. So a lot of it is lazy journalism, but the other side of this is we don't have enough positive media out there. So I would say, if you are critical on others, think, is there any value in actually being so critical on them? And B, do they need to hear about it? Because sometimes they don't, or a lot of times they don't. You know, a lot of this is driven by the way things are in the media or social media, where being abusive and hiding behind a false name and stuff is very common. But then we get on to move away from the critical stuff and take things personal. I've had a few things lately where people have been quite abusive, but I just got to say, it's like water off a duck's back to me. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. But at the same time, you do wonder why they were so offended and so critical on things. You know, for example, when I talked about women hitting the 30-year wall, there's been a few abusive messages on it. And I'm like, you know what? Why are you so offended? Because if it wasn't true, why would you be so offended? And that's the bizarre thing. You know, if it's true, guess what? Just accept it. You know, that's just part of growing up and being an adult, is accept that these things do happen. If you're not happy with life, fine. But you know what? It ain't going to change. Giving me abuse because you're not happy in life ain't going to change your outlook. But that's part of not taking things so personal, and it has been driven that way, and you see it everywhere now. You go to a business and the focus is on diversity, equality, and all these other bits which you're not allowed to challenge because you may offend somebody. My personal view is a lot of this stuff has no place in the workplace, because I don't care what people do outside of work. I don't care what their views are or whatever, as long as it doesn't impact work and as long as they're not driving it in a way that steers the business in a negative way, then that's surely what we should be looking for. But these personal aspects are being pushed into business, which creates a lot of environments people don't even want to work in. So one of the things I will say is just generally, a lot of people need the thicker skin, but also don't take personal offence, especially if it's an open discussion on something and you're just not happy with the outcome. Guess what? That's life. I mean, I hear a lot of stuff on the Brexit stuff, and I do wonder the mentality of some people, but at the same time, I'm not really bothered about it. I don't take it personally. It's just that sometimes I just can't be bothered to talk to people that can have such a narrow window. Because even when you point things out to them, they don't want to talk about those. They just have a narrow viewpoint. And it's those sort of things that sort of, you think, I'm wasting my time here. I've got better things to do. But I think that's part of moving away from seeing things as personal, which a lot of people do. Myself, I don't. It's water off a duck's back. So that's two things I would actually say is, if you do take things personal and if you do become very critical of others, I would recommend changing the way you see things, because the first thing you get is you're much more chilled out. I know people really wound up with the Brexit stuff, and I'm like, why are you worried about it? Oh, well, these foreigners take the jobs, blah, blah. That's like, there was nobody doing those jobs. I know farmers around Evesham, Worcester, and whatever. They're having to go further east. I think the last load of people they got to do the picking with from Moldova. Guess what? The people in the area don't want those jobs. Um, but it's just such a narrow way of thinking a lot of the time. And like I said, you can go, oh well, you don't understand your argument. You must have been just reading out the tabloids. Or you can simply say, okay, you know what? If you're not willing to do the research, I'm not willing to put the time in either. I don't need to talk to you. And I suppose that's part of it. It's just being able to disconnect and just think, I've got better things to do with my time. You're not going to change your view because, quite simply, it's a view over facts rather than actually going out there and finding different bits of information and try and pull it all together to see if you can get the bigger viewpoint. But that's part of it, I suppose. It's just it's the ability to just disconnect from it and not be bothered about it. Because whatever happens with the Brexit, in or out, it's just going to happen. My views on it or whatever ain't going to change. I'm not interested in running for as a politician. I'm not interested in driving life that way. It's simply always going to be political games, and there is always something. One of the things you find is you're supposed to have a good and a bad on everything. It's the whole yin and yang thing, but it's also the reality that if you're going one way or the other, it's often the bit in the middle where people are profiteering. You'll see policies change. For example, the governments in the UK will move from local working to area working, so they've gone more centralised, and then they'll reverse it 5 years later. Well, guess what? There's a huge infrastructure cost every time they do that. These things are about showing change and yet haven't changed a thing. But at the same time, have huge costs to them. But if you see it, you're just like, it's just normal. Don't need the lip service. Don't need being told you're doing this fantastic thing when in reality it was the same thing 5-10 years ago. It was just badged under a different Labour or Conservative government. It's just undone the last government and then reversed it and then going back to it again. Just not worth the time or effort. I suppose for me, that gets back to the news and things like that. I wouldn't waste your time on a lot of it. I find too much of it's too biased. I find too much of it is dumbed down. But then I look at things like the children in need thing, how that's forced. I'm not really going to get put too much on that, but I've got to admit, I'm not a fan of the way that is rammed down people's throats. Even when it's, as far as I'm aware, there's not full transparency on that either. So I can honestly say I have zero trust in it. And some of the stuff I've seen relating to charities and stuff over the years, the only way to do it is direct intervention. I do not trust the way people operate. I do not. It's become another entity. It is another business. There's no such thing as charity anymore. It's non-government organisation, non-profit, for-profit, you name it. There are all these little things popped up that quite simply are just taking money. And a lot of them don't do a lot. Let's be honest, a lot of them don't actually fulfill the promises that they give. So I've gone off on a little tangent there, but do I let that bother me? The answer is no. I just don't interact with them, and I won't let companies let me interact with them either. I refuse. On political grounds. I'm allowed to. This is part of it, and this is one of the things I'll say about these personal things where people go, "Oh, we're involved with this. We're promoting this charity, and you've got to get involved." It's like, no, I don't. No, I don't. And that's one thing I will stand my ground on. Because they do get involved in things where they want to promote as a business that they're heavily involved in this or heavily involved in that. But I don't think they should be forcing anybody to do it. And that's one of the things I do see with the BBC Children in Need thing. It forces it. You're not digging in your pockets. You're a bad person. You don't agree with it. You're a bad person. Yet at the same time, do I have concerns about the way they gather money and the way they self-loathe? Yeah, but it doesn't make me a bad person. I just don't watch it, don't engage with it. And the reason I picked that one up, because obviously it's most relevant this week here in the UK, but also the other side of that being, as I'm picking it up, quite simply, the best way to deal with that is simply no engagement. And just simply say, sorry, not interested, and walk away from it. But anyway, have a great afternoon. Thanks for watching.